Merry Christmas. During this glorious season, we celebrate the Holy Family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph this Sunday within the octave of the Nativity of the Lord. So take a few moments to review the readings for this liturgy and then rejoin me. You'll notice that there are a lot of options for the readings this week. That's up to the discretion of the preacher. I'll be exploring the readings from Genesis, from Psalm 105, from Hebrews 11, and the longer Lucan passage. This week kind of seems like a couples retreat. We have three sets of male and female figures, each sharing in the mystery of God's love for his people, manifest in covenant relationship. You see, a biblical covenant is not a contract between God and his people. It's not transactional, as in the sharing of goods or services. That's a contract. But a covenant, far from the sharing of property, it's a sharing of persons. What is exchanged is a firm commitment between persons to give their love, to give their lives, to give their commitment to one another. Today we can think of the sacrament of marriage as a covenant, and in fact all of the sacraments as parts of the new and everlasting covenant, where in each of those Christ shares himself with us and we reciprocate by offering our lives to him. One of the most important covenants in the Bible is God's covenant with Father Abraham. That covenant unfolds over several chapters of Genesis, beginning in Genesis 12 and then extending all the way to chapter 22. Abraham is an often imperfect partner in this relationship, and he often operates out of fear rather than faith. God sometimes promises seemingly impossible things, and God rarely operates according to our timetable. So like Abraham, we tend to want to create a backup plan, a plan B to kind of help God along to keep his promises. But that never ends well. God is so patient and gracious to Father Abraham, and he is for us today. We still can call Abraham the father of faith, and he remains so for three world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So Abraham is always a figure of hope for me, because the covenant of God rests in God's faithfulness, not our own. And he works even with our brokenness to accomplish his divine purposes, as he did with Abraham and Sarah. Our first reading then is a sign of hope for not only Abraham, but for us. We see God guiding Father Abraham's gaze to the stars. Just as they cannot be numbered, so Abraham's offspring will be innumerable. An unbelievable proposition for a sterile senior citizen like Abraham. Remember, the first promise of a son came when Abraham was 75 years old, and we're nearly 25 years later in the story. So it was a promise long in the making. With all of his missteps, though, Abraham put his faith in the Lord, and God made good on his promise. Sarah bore him the son, Isaac. Our responsorial psalm, Psalm 105, repeats the refrain, "The Lord remembers his covenant forever." In this psalm, God is thanked, he's glorified, he's joyfully praised for his faithfulness to his people. His promises are binding for thousands of generations. You know, part of the Abrahamic covenant is that his seed, Abraham's seed, would bring worldwide blessing. And we are the recipients of that promise, thousands of generations later, as the psalm proclaims. And we're celebrating that gift right now in the person of Jesus Christ, another unexpected, long-awaited coming from the God of surprises. Our second reading is from Hebrews 11. It's often called the Hall of Faith versus the Hall of Fame. It gives us an extraordinary list of biblical figures who put their trust in God's covenant faithfulness and experienced the power of his promises in their lives. In this passage, it especially highlights the faith of Abraham and Sarah, from their first steps of faith in Ur of Chaldees when they're called to go to a place they'd never seen before, all the way to the lonely brow of the mountain where God tested Abraham by asking him to offer his son Isaac. It's a faith-filled summary of the whole Abrahamic covenant from Genesis 12 to 22. Their faith and the faith of all the others mentioned in this chapter is meant to encourage us to persevere in our own faith, to trust God's goodness and fidelity even in the darkest of times. He has never failed to keep his word, and his word is so powerful that that word became flesh and dwelt among us. As our Alleluia versicle proclaims, in the past God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets, but in these last days he has spoken to us through his Son. Alleluia, alleluia. Our final scriptural scene is the presentation of Jesus in the temple, the fifth joyful mystery of the Rosary. Here the Holy Family gathers in God's house, and they meet another holy couple, Simeon and Anna. Not unlike Father Abraham, Simeon has been waiting for years to see the promises of God fulfilled. And finally, on this auspicious day, he holds in his hands the promised one, crying, "Now, Master, may you let your servant go in peace according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you prepared in the sight of all the peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, the glory for your people Israel." Later, a prophetess, Anna, in the same temple, like Sarah, advanced in years, gave thanks to God, and she spoke about this child to all who were awaiting the redemption of Jerusalem. These two figures, Simeon and Anna, were Psalm 105 personified. What do we find them doing? Thanking, praising, glorifying the Lord for his faithfulness to his promises. Now look, we can never imitate the perfection of the Holy Family, but we can look to the faith of Abraham, Sarah, Simeon, Anna, and the countless others in the Bible as a sure foundation for our own faith. Tonight, I invite you to go out and gaze into the night sky. See if you can count the number of stars and rejoice in the faithfulness of our God, who has kept his promise in innumerable ways. Consider reading aloud Psalm 105 and make it your prayer, celebrating the faithfulness of God. And create your own hall of faith of all the people God has brought into your path, models of faith even in the face of great difficulty and suffering, and offer your own thanks to God for their example. And rest tonight in the sure promises of God. There's a reason the church has us repeat the Song of Simeon every night in night prayer, because there's no surer place to find rest than in the promises of God.